welcome everybody this evening to a Zoom talk today on an interesting subject. It's not ancient India, but it's very contemporary India. So on behalf of everyone present here this evening, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Sukanya Ghosh and Veerangana Solanki. Greetings from the chairman, the trustees, the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, and the staff of the CSMBS, the Executive Committee of the Museum Society, our friends from the Museum Society, and other friends who have joined us this evening for this talk, The Parting of Waves. But before I launch into this evening's proceedings, I have some very good news to share with the members present here today. I received this message on Sunday night from Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, who was in Boston. He writes, "Dear friends and colleagues, I'm sharing this message from the MIT campus in Boston. It was very kind of the sun god to bestow his generosity after 2 gloomy days. But nothing stops America and the great induction ceremony by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences at Cambridge, Boston, to which I am elected, proved this yesterday. I never dreamed of being recognized and honored by such a prestigious institution of remarkable minds. But it is because of you and your love for the CSMBS that I have reached here as your representative. Museum education for me has always been, and I quote, more for others, unquote, an open ground to a meaningful life. It was a joy to hear the name of our museum at a global and distinguished event like this. It was even more rewarding to hear the museum be described as an institution of ideas. This has been a collective effort, and we prove again and again that this, quote, togetherness, unquote, we share as a community can bring impactful changes in our society and in the world. I accepted the honor yesterday on behalf of the CSMBS team, trustees, and friends. This honor belongs to us all. Thank you. Signed off as Sabyasachi Mukherjee. It really is an honor that Mr. Mukherjee, the Director General of the CSMBS, who we are all familiar with in Mumbai, has been recognized, and he has been given this honor, and which he very kindly says he accepts on behalf of all of us. What is the role of our museum society, ladies and gentlemen? It is the role to educate on topics as diverse as archaeology or contemporary Indian art or the cutting edge of contemporary Indian art. So thank you very much for joining us today for what is going to be a very interesting talk called Arriving and Departing Through the Parting of Waves. A few words about our speakers today. And I'll start with Sukanya, who is exhibiting currently at Cymroza Art Gallery. Sukanya's artistic practice spans painting, photography, and the moving image. She studied painting at the Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University, Baroda, and animation film design at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad. Her recent exhibitions and projects include the Cellular Legacies, curated by Diksha Nath in 2023, earlier this year in New Delhi. Imagine Documents, curated by Ravi Agarwal in 2022. The Texture of Promises, curated by Alejandro Castellote Tabalaquera, 2022 in San Sebastian. Indian Contemporary Video Art in 2021. Vantage Point, Sharjah 9 in Sharjah Biennale in 2021, and Repairing the Work of Time, curated by Francois Cheval at Yangzhou Museum of Photography in China. She's been awarded the Charles Wallace India Trust Award project commission for 5 million incidents, the Goethe Institute and Rax Media collected, and the Flash France Artists Commission 2017-18 at the French Embassy in India, among others. She has been artist in residence at the Franz Masriel Centrum in Belgium and in Khoj, New Delhi, Spike Island, Bristol, and AIR Valeris in France. She lives and practices her work between Delhi and Calcutta. Thank you, Sukanya, for joining us this evening and being in conversation with Veerangana Solanki. We know both these young women extremely well, ladies and gentlemen, and they have volunteered to give this talk unhesitatingly at the request of the Museum Society of Mumbai. Veerangana is an independent curator and writer based in India. She is interested in the way interdisciplinary forms and creative practices merge to create dialogues in public and private spaces and the convergence of images across disciplines. Further, her research and practice consider how historical and contemporary thought informs exhibition making and artistic practices. Veerangana was a 2019 Brooks International Research Fellow at Tate Modern and a resident at the Delphina Foundation. Currently, she is Program Director at Space Studio Baroda, a core team member of Art Chain India, and teaches the Curatorial Practices MFA course at Kathmandu University. She is also a curatorial advisor for Art Mumbai 2023 and a visual arts curator for the Serendipity Arts Festival, also in 2023. What prompted us to do this talk? It started with an exhibition called The Parting of Ways. The title of today's talk is Arriving and Departing Through the Parting of Ways. And what are we going to see today? Of course, lots of very interesting cutting edge slides, but we're going to hear a conversation between two fine women practicing art, practicing it as a form and practicing it as a theory. Sukanya Ghosh and curator Veerangana Solanki will discuss Ghosh's process and practice as an artist in the context of this ongoing exhibition at Cymroza Art Gallery. This exhibition has been curated marvelously. There's a third triumvirate in this trio, is the curator of the exhibition, Mr. Rahab Alana. They will discuss the artist's engagement with her family archive, and we all have family archives, and expand it into how the archive acts as a prism of arrivals and departures for storytelling in varied media, such as images, collages, and digital works, and with perspectives that shift images from abstraction into our imagination. Thank you, Sukanya. Thank you, Veerangana, for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we will keep you informed of how we're going to celebrate Mr. Mukherjee's award, so do stay in. And before I end, I'd like to hand you over and compliment our technical team who has been with us for the last 6 years, guiding and directing us. So over to you, tech team, and thank you very, very much to both the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bodhaj, for the kind introduction, and would also like to thank the Museum Society and Cymroza Art Gallery, where Sukanya's exhibition is currently on display, curated by Rahab Alana. Sukanya and I will be in conversation about her work, where she'll also be sharing a few slides as we speak. But just before we go there, I'd like to start with the last line of Rahab's essay for the exhibition, where he speaks about the parting of ways and how the parting of ways urges us to stay aware of at least one core function of the existential particle in any form. It serves as a potential reminder that we can remain satisfied with understanding the part, since the truth may well be that despite our efforts or desires, we can never really know the whole. When Sukanya and I started talking about how we wanted to focus on this talk, but also connect it with her exhibition, which I hope many of you who are in Mumbai will have a chance to see. Something that I have been researching, and I feel Sukanya's work has also done, is how there is this arrival and departure from the image itself, and not just this in this exhibition, but also across her larger practice. And while speaking about how the image acts as a catalyst in different forms, what we'll see through our conversation is also how the image has, in a way, been a creation through Sukanya's engagement with the archive, but also how it's acted as a point of using it to move into other mediums, such as collages, painting, and how she's working through that. Sukanya, should we share screen and then we can perhaps begin from there?
Just do that.
And something which is also, and I'm sure all of us have experienced this, that when we talk about images and we've seen something, the way it triggers memory in some way, it starts layering as we move through time. And that's also something that Sukanya has worked with a lot. But perhaps, Sukanya, we can begin with how you have been thinking through this arrival and departure from the image, and what it's meant for you first to work with photography itself, and how that has moved into different mediums across your practice.
Okay, thank you so much, Veerangana. Before I begin, of course, thank you to the Museum Society for hosting this talk, and for Mrs. Godrej for her kind words, and the tech team for the seamless flow of things. Moving on to your question, I've always been a collector of images, and in my practice over time, found images have been quite an integral part of my work. So when I started working with this group of photographs, or any photographs actually, I was primarily looking at it as something that I would use as a collage, where I was just looking at elements of pictures to combine in some way. But when we got into this, when I got into looking at these photographs a little closer, I started investigating it much more. And that is where I think my kind of engagement with this, with various media, various processes of looking at the image really have become much more complex. And the photograph itself, like if you take an image as a repository of time, of frozen time, and you think of things that by, again, something that I do in my practice, which is erasures and layering, and how we build meaning through altering this time in a way, constructing narratives through this. And I think that is where it departs from the original idea of the photograph, if there is such a thing. Because we know there has been a lot of writing about what the photograph is. Is it a capturing of a moment, but it's a moment that is lost? Similarly, in looking at my photographs from the family archive, I imagine my work as, there's been a rupture of time. There's been a significant amount of time from the time the photographs have been taken. There is no, if we take away, I want to examine what happens when we take away context, time, location from an image, because these are images sometimes without provenance. Sometimes we don't know who the people are in them. And in that sense, there is also a significant departure from the originary image, so to speak. I also like combine things. So each image or each work that I have created consists of many, many different parts, where it's been either digitally collaged and then printed and then painted upon and then drawn on. So there are various practices that come into which interpolate the meaning of the image. So if that makes any sense at all.
Definitely. And also just picking up on what you said of trying to remove the image from time, but also from its context, sometimes when it's not dated. It connects with something you said about the archive as being an opening for you, where it's not about a nostalgic trip and making it look pretty, but how do we move beyond that? And very often what happens with archives is that they are associated with time, with the past. But instead, what they really are is what somebody else has edited out and put together as perhaps what they thought was a collection. And instead of looking at it as something that's a closed chapter, you look at it as something that is just the beginning or the opening of moving forward from there and changing things from there. So what are your thoughts on this idea?
Yeah, sure. I mean, exactly that. Actually, like when working with family archives, the idea is not just to work with some old photographs and make them look attractive, which is easy enough to do. Everyone loves sepia photographs. But I think for me, the interest is to work through this archive in a way to, as you said, expand it, open it up to more possibilities. Like, how can we look at this set of photographs of people we don't know, of places that we don't know where they are. Perhaps there are some annotations, but we don't know. If we take away all these things and we combine it in various other ways, what kind of interesting propositions, narratives can we construct? That has been my intention, to kind of look a bit deeply. And I have been working with this, with these photographs, the family archival photographs, for a while now. So since perhaps 2016. And I've gone in many directions while working with them. And initially, my idea was to progress much more towards abstraction, to take these and kind of remove all context from it and take it to a place which is no longer that recognizable. And, you know, I keep coming back to this idea of the spectral image, the unheimlich, the familiar that is not quite familiar, the recognizable that is not quite what you think it is. And that's, I mean, and on one hand, playful, it's also a way of like muddling the image, of creating layers, of creating a palimpsest of the image itself by using various components. And, you know, like Rahab said in that line, I'm very, as an animator as well, I'm very concerned with parts and the whole and how I can take it apart and put it together. And that interests me. So we kind of constantly are doing that in these works, so to speak. What is this? I was going to say something else about the archive and the familial thing. I've forgotten.
I'm going to come to the familial, but
Yeah.
also something which I feel when you say the family archive, and that's something that you've been working with quite closely, which we'll break down, but just how you put it out in the public realm itself, it's also how you are, in a way, objectifying the image when the personal enters the public, and how you distance yourself from that. And how easy has that been for you? And how do you look at these images entering the public realm and becoming just another image, which may be from your archive? But also, I think that's where this idea of the familiarity with the family comes in.
I mean, frankly, I've had no hesitation putting it all out there and like putting everything there, because I mean, one part of it is also because so many of these photographs are photographs that are really of people that we don't know. But while I was doing that, there has also been a fair amount of grandparents and great-grandparents who have kind of wafted through these images and are there to see. I'm not so, yeah, I don't feel like I'm taking, yeah, it's not been a problem to put the personal out there and to talk of it, because I feel like what I'm doing with them is treating them in a different way. And I'm creating images, and everywhere I interfere with the images so much that they don't remain that authentic, for want of a better word. I've always altered things in ways that either the faces are not recognizable, the vistas are not recognizable, the landscapes are not recognizable. And it's also okay, because I'm like, in some cases where I very kind of love the use of the word of creating landscapes of loss, or, kind of things like that, they are personal. Our work is personal. As visual artists, it's difficult to distance yourself after a while. So often in a lot of work, you work instinctively and then take a step back and you see something that you didn't realize was getting put in that. So those things happen, and it's always personal.
And with the personal, something that often comes in with photography, and especially now with the ownership of the image and how it works in the public realm. Is that something that you've had to face at home with your family when you've used these images, or have they thought about it in that way as well?
Yeah. I mean, they forget that they threw away these pictures to begin with. And now that I'm working with them, and they're like, oh, where's this picture from? And, and then we're like, well, it came from a box somewhere, and it was there. But yeah, I don't think, and everybody's overjoyed when they occasionally recognize someone. But that's the fun of it, because you try and recognize someone, but it's not really that person. And it's like, it almost becomes, for my family at least, it's a game, because then they try and ferret out information of what was, but that's, it's never really the whole picture anyway. So.
And also when it comes to from what you said of how you start recognizing things, and something you've done is this imagining of stories in some way, where you have spoken about moving from the abstraction of the image, which I think you see in your earlier works too, and how that comes back to just looking at the image with either the characters that one may recognize from one work to the other, or start seeing familiarity between their families and what you have in the portraits. But
Sure.
how almost become building of, sorry.
No,
of
I think
storytelling and myth making in some sense.
Yeah, so I am telling stories. I'm making imagined landscapes, imagined stories, imagined constructions. I'm colliding people who are not there, who, from different images into the same image, as it were, who might never have met, so there's all kinds of that kind of collisions happening in the thing. I'm also interpolating with the drawn elements and painted elements, and creating lines and shapes and things where it, it causes, I believe, a disjuncture. Like, it's no longer just the photograph, it's something else coming into that photograph. It's not discrete as one thing. So all the work, and especially all the works in this show, are of images that have multiple processes going on, multiple combinations of techniques in a thing. So formally also, I'm looking at the image not just as a discrete, as one photograph, but as a combination of various things. And in doing that, this thing of like recognition, like so many people have seen the work and responded to it in so many different ways, because this thing of this familiarity thing is quite a potent thing. It draws people in, and on one level you feel like, we have seen these pictures, or we all have these pictures. It's so universal, a certain kind of old family pictures or sepia toned pictures. And, even if you've lost the ones that were here in your family, it's there somewhere. So it does make you reimagine the archive. Even the viewer themselves are interpolating their own reactions while reading the picture, reading the images, as it were. And I think, that's the fun bit for me, to see the very many reactions that people have. And sometimes they spot things, or they make a observation that gets me thinking about something else that I never thought of before.
And from what I see, or from what you shared on the screen as well, there's this fragmenting of the image from very intentional drawn lines, and there are people at the back who may not be recognized. There's one person facing out. And when you talk about how you're imagining these stories, are these coming from other incidents that you've collected as well, or are these stories, narratives that you're writing and then creating them or choreographing them in some sense?
I mean, it is choreography, but I wouldn't say that I actually think it out before I make a work, or actually have some story in mind or a narrative in mind where I then compose it. It all actually begins from the image. And I look at the image and I kind of, it's quite intuitive. It's, I work fairly quickly and I put a couple of things together, and then I sort of grow it from that. And as I said, often I work quite quickly and intuitively, and only later, when you kind of take a step back, then you see some things have emerged, which then you want to accentuate and you want to continue. But it's not a thing where I actually think that, okay, this is the kind of story or history that I'm trying to tell. If anything, I'm trying to, I'm trying to shatter the myths that were in the images themselves and make like some kind of inverted landscapes and outtakes almost, to slightly confuse you if possible. Because there's like, for instance, this image is, it's got such a lot of drawn elements in it. And the drawn elements are not just, there's this, a little bit about the technique. This is a UV print of a photographic collage that I made digitally, which I printed on acrylic. And then I painted on it from the back. So there's a reverse painting. So in a sense, I was kind of playing the part of like, photo studios that kind of color photographs and put in all these kind of like weird shades here and there. But there's a lot of like, you don't know where the photograph begins and where the drawing begins, where the photograph ends and where the drawing begins, rather.
It's interesting what you say about photo studios, but I think backdrops in photo studios played such an important role.
Yeah.
In that as well, whether it was this role playing or this need to have to become somebody else and transform in this costume play, which came into these, and in a way you're drawing from that.
Yeah.
And including both different materials, but also taking from the image and moving into another medium, but based on the image itself, which is something we spoke about earlier, of the departure from the image. But just before we move into the various mediums and how those come into view, I just wanted to step into going back to your family, because you have spoken about how your grandmother, and there is a fairly strong matriarchal presence of images in your work too. How does this go back into just looking at say women in your work, and how that, and also through that you've used elements of newspapers, cuttings from albums, old family photographs, and they're not only from the archive, but what ends up happening through it is that they open up parallel histories, because it's not through, I mean, through your, say, for instance, your grandmother itself, it is your family history, but through the newspaper cuttings, it opens up lots of parallel histories. So how do these layers of mediums and histories work for you, both in the creation of the image, but also moving away from the image in your work?
So maybe I'll move forward a few slides to answer that.
And we can go back to those slides as well.
So my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, has been a very sort of like focal point in my practice with, especially with regard to these photographs, because she, a lot of these photographs and ephemeral kind of like memorabilia and stuff that has emerged, which I make work out of, has emerged from her. And when I say emerged from her, it is both in terms of her kind of role as a storyteller, but also her role as a collector, of somebody who stashed a lot of stuff, and various cupboards and boxes and things have, I've extracted so much material from that, that I find that she becomes a very focal point for me. And this work is called Smriti's Dream. I don't know why it says untitled, but it's called Smriti's Dream, and Smriti is my grandmother's name, which, as you know, also Smriti is also memory, coincidentally. And this is a etching. It's etching with a chinekole. And I'll just give you a little background about this work particularly, which will give you some sort of idea of what I'm talking about. And basically, of my grandmother's things, I found a little diary, a scrapbook of sorts. And it had newspaper cuttings from different papers, and it's a long book like that. And I was very intrigued in the beginning because there were fairly random newspaper clippings. I couldn't tell what was going on. Then there was interspersed with her handwriting, writing some things. On looking closer, I realized that this is my grandmother's engagement with the freedom struggle and the idea of independence. This is her kind of little diary where she's having her, I would say, I would imagine this is one of the first kind of like political engagement of sorts. My grandmother being born into a very sheltered kind of background, often by the time she was 8, homeschooled. So being very cut off from what is happening around her, and what is happening around her is the whole freedom struggle and independence of the country. And, you know, she gets married at age 17 and has a certain amount of slightly more exposure than before, but still it's a thing. So her engagement with this is through this cutting of newspaper articles and pasting it. And I found this particular little piece, which is in this thing here. It's her handwriting, which is extremely scrawled. So that is a project to sit and translate all of it. And she says that, oh, you know, today this person has announced something that has given us new hope. And this is something that we never had the courage to dream of before. And she's basically talking about the call for freedom, the Quit India movement, you know, August Kranti, Gwalior Tank, etc. So this is her scrapbook diary, and I made this work as an etching, where again, process and media wise, also this multiple things going on as usual. So I had a copper plate on which I printed with a UV print, and then we bit that in acid, and then I used soft ground and I drew some more, and then we bit that in acid again. And then chinekole, which is a process by which you can take a special kind of paper and you fuse it in the process of taking the print with this cellulose-based glue. And so it's a sort of collage, but it's kind of fused into the print itself. So then this work emerged from all of those processes. And yeah, so she is very much the focus of my work. And as I said, you know, like I started working with a bunch of photographs, and I've done various series where I've gone into abstraction. I've focused on the landscape. I was getting more and more abstract. I was enjoying abstracting the image right more. And in this show, The Parting of Ways, I've kind of come full circle, and I've come back to the people in the photographs, even if we don't know who they are. And in some cases, some people who we do know. And I want to think about them or make stories about them, or like look at them in a way that I wasn't doing so before.
And while you're talking about abstraction, the previous slide that you had on with smaller wooden frames, and I remember you also mentioning that in
Oh,
this,
yeah, this one.
sorry,
Yeah.
this one. And you'd also, I remember, mentioned that some of these were the original photographs that you used and some were reprints. So
Yeah.
how did you work through that? Because again, this moves into what you were talking about earlier, the abstraction before it moves into people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're the original photographs.
Yeah, so this is an older work. And I was so you know that some of the photographs themselves are so brittle that they were, you know, they kind of broke by themselves. So I did not rip everything up, contrary to many people gasping and saying, oh my God, this is all like archival things, please don't rip them up. But all of these things actually emerged out of conversations with Rahab, actually, who is the curator of the show, about also talking about the analog, how we perceive the analog, what does it mean, and we would have a lot of conversations about that. So that was also part of like looking at these very physical, tactile analog materials that exist, proper like silver gelatin photographs, and which had natural you know, which had either torn apart or which had defects in them, which were quite brittle, and using that to kind of create an image and work through some things. And I've added in this particular work, there's, you know, some thread, there's some paint, gold paint here and there. It's a small work, a set of 9. So they're about like 4 by 6 each, which is roughly the size of each of the photographs, but each image is made of different things. And yeah, I'm quite, that's how I was looking at the whole abstracting the things, just, you know, looking at elements of the image, wondering how I can combine 2 together, mix and match, see how that worked, and see what kind of a sensory or emotional reaction you get from that.
And it's also in a way what you said earlier of how that preciousness comes in the moment you frame it, the moment you put it in this context. But before that,
yeah,
lying in a box, nobody's thinking about it.
Yeah.
When
And
it's
we framed it, and suddenly, but that's the thing, like you framed it and you suddenly you confront it, you look at it differently, and you look at this like combination of 9 images, and you look and here and there, and you know the idea of the punctum that you were talking about, of a small detail that then makes you look at it differently, which could be anything, like, you know, you look at it and you're like, oh wait, that middle thing looks like it's part of the Taj Mahal, and you recognize something, or you see something which is like looks like a bird but it's actually a piece of thread, and you know, it's kind of something that adds value to the image or leads you to think very differently about it, and you know, can lead you down so many paths.
And that's also where I think memory comes in so many ways, because you recognize it and you return to both the memory and the image to just hear it further and how you're experiencing it.
Yeah, and I thought about how we remember, actually how you remember things. You never remember things as they were. You always embellish, augment, change things according to our own kind of lives, or what is remembered is never really what was, if there was any such thing. Like, you know, there's no original thing. So
no, that's true. And also how the associations get formed, and that, and how we move forward from there. And I think that's something that you worked through quite beautifully through even say the family and the familiarity which you spoke about earlier, how the people are coming in, and how through these layers and through exploring how these mediums are in a way merging with each other, and how you brought all of these in, each one of these opens up various perspectives. And this is also something that you have spoken about being quite interested through your practice of whether it's through photographs, collages, videos, and even painting. There's almost a making and a fragmenting of the image through this process that opens up these different perspectives for you, which you've described through these landscapes. And I think some of the slides that you were going through, the vistas, and also what you've described as the lithopoetic space with the way you explained the print to us.
Yeah. I mean, I made up that word, but I love it.
It's beautiful because it's really where it, and
yeah, sometimes you have to make up these words to express what you want. I mean, because that's exactly the kind of space that I want to evoke. Finally, as artists, when we are, playing around with form, or you're playing around with media or images, the end product is there to kind of evoke something in the viewer, or to create, I don't know, create a kind of almost intangible evocation of something. And what is that something? I don't know. It could be different things for people. But while I'm working, I'm trying to create that space, and I'm trying to create this poetry from those images, as it were. So, yeah, and I quite ruthlessly employ all means and to do it.
Which is, I mean, and also when I remember you mentioning there was a large painting where you said you just started experimenting with a new form of painting and printmaking. And I'm curious about, though you work through and with the image, you don't have this hesitation of exploring new mediums. And what does that do for you in a way as a feedback loop for your work, but also how you look at it as an expansion through your practice, where it's not diluting it, but enriching it?
I think it's very liberating to, kind of swim through various media to make things. The world is your oyster. You can do so many things. And I find it difficult actually to stick to any one thing. And it's always been the case, possibly because I am just too restless or something, I don't know. But it's always been more interesting to me to take something and push it into another media and see where that will go. So there's always this formal exploration. So, that's why I never stick. I can't stick with just one thing and all of that. Like, any of these images have so many processes going, and that's the, like, there has to be some interest and kind of engagement for me while making the work. It's not enough just to kind of put two pictures together and say, okay, done. But sometimes it's always also not evident, perhaps, but there has been, for me at least, a very satisfying process of getting there, where I've, either printed something, scanned something, collaged it, printed it out, drawn on it, scanned it again, made a film out of it, done some animation with it, projected it from somewhere, and then the work has emerged. And it's only by doing a lot of this stuff is also where you see some things fitting in, like what you like to do, or what certain kind of work needs, what kind of light, or what kind of shape or size or scale to show itself.
And I'm curious about this moving image also, which comes in through your video, because that's also been layered in so many ways.
Yeah, so this, we can go to the, so the work in this exhibition, for instance, which we have projected inside a cupboard on a piece of muslin cloth, is called A Chair Walks into a Landscape. And as I said, my working with the parts and the whole, with movement and stasis, with a lot of kind of oppositional factors. Got a lot of traction from studying animation, actually, because as an animator, you look at a piece of moving image in frames, you kind of take it apart, you realize how one drawing and another drawing and another drawing can create a set of movements. And in this way, I've been using photography to do this kind of thing, where I actually make the moving image. And again, like in this video, I first sat and did scanned photographs, digitally created the images, and then put them together, made a moving image, then exported that, then drew on that, then put it back as a thing. So, there's a lot of back and forth of kind of through mediums and through things. And I like to call my moving image works at least optical collages, because I feel, again, a word I made up, but I feel like just to say animation or video or something doesn't quite capture the processes and things that went into making of that and into what I want to evoke. And, there is such a working with light, like photography is that. Like, I remember somebody, I think in Roland Barthes or something, where the Latin for photograph literally means extracted from light. And it is really that. It's how we, play around with light. We expose something, we hide something, we clear something. So I call these optical collages, and I like playing around again with the way we project things, how it's projected, where it's projected, how, something like this can speak to the other works that are next to it. So
that's incredible. And just a final question, I think, before we open up to questions with interest of time. Looking at this intersection of media, something that you've also been exploring a lot is scaling up in some way with the image, but also through the way you've been working with painting and transitioning medium as well. And there's a work in the exhibition which you particularly focused on when you spoke about this.
Yeah, so this is that image of, again, this is another grandmother, one who, of course, there is a backstory of a very tragically short life and all of that. But this is a photograph that I had where I have the photograph, but this particular image was taken from the negative. And the negative itself was damaged, and the cracks that you see that I've accentuated are actually the damages in the negative itself. So it was a couple of negatives that have got stuck together, brittle with age. It had broken off in bits. And I scanned this, and I've used that, and I've used another photograph below it. And I decided, like, this thing of coming back to figures, of reconsidering the human beings who are here. And I created this work, and I created it in a very large scale. This is the first time that I'm working on such scale with photographs. They're not painting. So I printed this quite large, and it even if I say so myself, it's quite a quite a nice kind of confrontational space that you have while looking at the work, because it's a life-size image of this person. And again, I know this is my grandmother. If I didn't tell you, it's a person, and it is again removed of context and place, and it has all these elements, but at the same time you're able to see the figure of someone. It creates some kind of familiarity in you of seeing this kind of image. And basically I have 3 of these really big works. This one is of my grandmother. I have another work where I think it's there in the slides. Apologies for going back and forth like this. I had a more ordered way of thinking. This is another one that's very huge, where the figure is more away in the distance a lot more. But again, it's very, you're looking straight at them. You're imagining somewhere this person is either looking at you or away from you, or there is a direct encounter with these figures in these works that are there.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I feel also through that, given the scale and how one almost gets absorbed into these images, there's a different way of taking away from this as a viewer as well. And what it might do as a departure for the viewer through your work in the image that has this familiarity of space and time.
Yeah, I wanted to read a few lines from Rahab.
Yes.
Since we are missing him, and he is somewhere on a train across the channel at the moment, and he couldn't be here with us. But he has written this very beautiful essay for the show, and he has been quite instrumental in, I would say, keeping the conversations going about this archive and the photographs and how we think of it, and has taken it from being just me kind of messing around and doing some things to actually forcing me to actually think about it, think about why I'm doing it, where it's going, where it's coming from, all those things. And he's been very persistent in making me think. And I'm just going to read.
Yeah, it'd be great to have a part of Rahab at the beginning, at the end of this conversation to his essay, which is brilliant. And I think you can also find that on the website of Cymroza Art Gallery, or for those of you who are here can read it at the space itself.
Yeah, it's also up on, I think, the Al-Qazi Foundation as well.
Okay.
So he says about the exhibition, he says, the array continues to question authorship, authenticity, originality, self-identity through the internalization of time. 3 women wade into the sea, seeking a distant shore, inverted onto the lower plane of the image. 4 men, some dressed in typical working class garments, stand above an opaque pool, cataclysmically ruptured in two by another embedded landscape, perhaps signifying an emotional rift and future separation. We may ask, are they part of Sukanya's real or fictive biographical imaginings? In another composition, 2 women lounge against a false surface, while in the distance, their imagined home, now inverted, sits atop a rocky landscape. These uncertain horizons and ambivalent destinations summon an existential poignancy, the unheimlich, as Ghosh intimates, of the familiar becoming unfamiliar, of loss and retrieval, of circular journeys, of beginnings always already sutured to their ends, morphing her visions of the real and the surreal, and repeatedly staging arrival and departure. The artist interrogates the many symbolic balances of location and psychogeographies.
Thank you, Sukanya. I think with that, we could perhaps open it up to questions as well. And thank you all for being here through the conversation. And thank you once again to Museum Society, Mr. Godrej, and the tech team for keeping this together and for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.